Cooper Kupp leaves the game, looked ugly when he first got hurt, was limping off the field, according to the Athletics' Jordan Rodrigue. Kupp appears to have avoided a worst-case scenario, but this is what Sean McVay said after the game, that, quote, it didn't look good, it didn't sound good. We know what this team is going through right now. Matthew Stafford did not play in the loss against the Cardinals with the concussion. The offense has been broken. Based on how things are going, I'm sure they want to make sure Cooper Kupp is 100% for whatever the future holds, not necessarily 2022. Do you think we're going to see him in week number 11?
No, I don't think you'll see him in week number 11. I think he'll sit out for a couple weeks. I mean, you got to be careful with this. You don't want anything to linger into next year. They're done this year. We know that. You know that. Everybody knows that. They're finished. It's a bad team. It's not just the quarterback play, and that was awful on Sunday. It's not just, and by the way, it wasn't that good with Matt Stafford in there. It's not just the receivers. It's the offensive line. They've started 9 different combinations this year. They can't block anybody. So whether he's in there or not, this is a bad offense. So you may as well protect him and don't put him back out there until he's completely healed. Otherwise, it makes no sense.
All right, Heath, we'll see what happens in week 11 for them. They get the Saints. But looking at just this team right now, let's assume Stafford comes back, because hopefully it seemed like he was close. So assume Stafford's back out there. Allen Robinson, Van Jefferson, Tyler Higbee. Give me the breakdown of those guys if there is no Cooper Kupp in that matchup.
I think the receivers are just desperation flex. I mean, you look at the line for this game right now. The Saints are 3-point favorites. The over-under is 39. They will have the Rams one of the lowest implied point totals, whether Stafford plays or not this week. Robinson would be my favorite, but just barely over Van Jefferson. The guy there, Tyler Higbee, really saw his participation increase when Kupp got hurt. Still didn't run very many routes, though, and he just had that success against the best matchup in fantasy football. The Saints are one of the worst for tight ends. So probably not going to want to start any Rams. Higbee might be ranked the closest to a starter because he's a tight end.
Yep, it's just not a pretty situation right now. And obviously, if it's John Wolford, it's completely hands-off for all these guys. So we'll have an update for you throughout the week here when we get one on Cooper Kupp as well as Matthew Stafford. For Zach Ertz, in that same game, suffered a knee injury early in the game, and according to ESPN's Adam Schefter, Ertz is expected to miss multiple weeks. According to the report, the ACL is intact, but they're going to wait to get an MRI today. So, Pete, you've seen this enough. Guy gets carted off with that knee injury multiple weeks. Who steps up without him? Because we saw, again, different quarterback, Colt McCoy. Maybe Kyler Murray comes back in their Week 11 game. They get an extra day to play the 49ers next Monday night. But Rondale Moore looked great. DeAndre Hopkins still produced. Is it all systems going? And maybe Trey McBride, any interest there just in what he could potentially do?
Yeah, I mean, look, Trey McBride hasn't done much at all this season, and he's kind of been a little bit of a disappointment. And so, but if Ertz is gone, he's got to play, and he's got the skills to be a good, effective pass-catching tight end. So I think keep an eye on him. It's a bad tight ends, as Heath always says, is a terrible position for fantasy. So maybe he's a guy to pick up in your leagues and keep an eye on him down the road. I don't think it would be immediate, but yeah, Hopkins and Moore, those are the guys. You got to keep an eye on them. And by the way, I thought Colt McCoy threw the ball pretty well on Sunday. I really did. I thought he did some really good things, got it out on time, got it out in the rhythm. And you could tell that the offense seemed a little bit more fluid in terms of the passing game than it's been at times this year. So I think that was a good step for the Cardinals. He's not going to be the quarterback, but it was a good step for him to step in as a backup and play well.
It's really pretty amazing. Trey McBride played 91% of the snaps yesterday. Saw 1 target, same number as Steven Anderson. They just went all Rondale Moore and DeAndre Hopkins. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a small boost for James Conner in the passing game, just because we often see that running back targets and tight end targets are kind of negatively correlated. When there's not as many tight end targets, there's more for the running backs. But mostly you're starting DeAndre Hopkins and Rondale Moore as top 20 wide receivers, no matter who the quarterback is.
And, well, again, not the easiest matchup against 49ers, as we found out with the Chargers receiving core, but just the amount of volume that those two guys should get. But we'll show you Trey McBride where he stacks up from a waiver standpoint when we get to that later in the show. Jerry Jeudy suffered an injury to his ankle. According to the NFL Network's Ian Rappaport, he's getting an MRI today. Heading into the MRI, though, the belief is that the strained muscle behind his ankle is not going to be necessarily something that's season-ending or maybe even long-term. But, Pete, again, looking at this receiving core here for the Broncos, it was ugly. Russell Wilson was getting beat up by the Titans. Cortland Sutton didn't have a lot of separation. Some moments, for Kendall Hinton, Greg Dulcich was a complete disappointment. Is this offense just continually going to be broken from a passing standpoint?
Yes, it is. And look, it's easy to point the finger at Russell Wilson. I get it. He hasn't played very well. Or at Nate Hackett, because he hasn't really put in a good system for him to succeed. But again, this is another team. You go back to the offensive line. They're awful. They're awful up front. That was a depleted Titans defense. I mean, they were missing some key guys, including Jeffrey Simmons and Bud Dupree, and they still had 5 sacks. You can't play football that way. You got to protect your quarterback. So from a passing game standpoint, look, if they had Judy, maybe it's a little bit better, but not much.
Heath, we said going into the game that Courtland Sutton's kind of living in that number 3 receiver range, and you brought up just the numbers with Judy and Sutton when they've been on the field. If Judy does miss time, they get the Raiders this week. It's a great matchup. Does that increase Sutton to the point where he's a number 2 receiver? And Greg Dulcich was saying prior to the bye week, must start rest of the way. He did not look like a must start tight end in his first game after the bye.
Absolute disaster. I was so ready to just write off this entire Broncos offense. I didn't want anything to do with them. And then you look at the next matchup and it's the Raiders. It's the ultimate get right spot. Basically the only good fantasy day that Russell Wilson's had 3 touchdowns against them earlier in the year. So I will have Courtland Sutton as a borderline number 2, low end number 2, high end number 3 wide receiver. And Dulcich will probably be right around tight end 12. Might prefer him over Higbee, but right in that range.
Just hopefully get right against the Raiders. Everybody gets right against the Raiders, so hopefully that's the case for Russell Wilson and company. Juju Smith-Schuster suffered a concussion in the game, Pete, and we saw that after he left. There was no Mecole Hardman in the game as well against the Jaguars. Kadarius Toney stepped up, and MVS had a bounce back game to a certain extent. How did the Chiefs get by if there is no Juju, is no Hardman taking on the Chargers in Week 11?
Well, you mentioned Toney, and I think he's the guy, and I told you that on the pregame show, our pregame show on Sunday. I thought he would get more and more active and more involved, and I think he will. I think he's the guy to keep an eye on. He only had the 5 targets, but 4 for 57, and a touchdown's a productive day for a guy who probably still doesn't know the entire offense. And so I think as the season moves along, he's going to become more and more of a factor in the offense, whether Juju Smith-Schuster and Mecole Hardman are there anyways. I think he's the guy to keep an eye on in that passing game.
Heath, how interested are you in picking up Toney and picking up MVS? They're both available in the range that we talk about, 65% of leagues or fewer. So is this an opportunity for these 2 guys to now maybe be starters for fantasy managers taking on the Chargers in Week 11 if Juju can't go and Hardman can't get back?
More interested in Toney than MVS. I mean, you saw him moving on the field, and he just looks completely different than anything else the Chiefs have at wide receiver. And so I agree with Pete. He's going to have an impact no matter who's there. If there's no Juju this week, he's probably going to be right in that Courtland Sutton borderline top 25 range for me. I think MVS is still a boom-bust number 3 wide receiver, still just 4 targets in this game, had a bad drop even on the 1 pass that he didn't catch.
Again, we'll see. We'll keep you updated on Juju, but we know the concussion protocol was an ugly one, so if he's not able to go Week 11, put Kadarius Toney at the priority list, top of the priority list for your waiver wire moves for this week. Again, his roster percentage right at 65%, so it could be available in a lot of 10-team leagues and maybe some 12-team leagues as well. Gerald Everett suffered a groin injury in the loss for the Chargers against the 49ers. Now, they did not have Keenan Allen. They did not have Mike Williams. Josh Palmer had a decent game. DeAndre Carter scored a touchdown. Pete, we don't know what's going to be for Week 11, but this is just another frustrating performance for Justin Herbert as well. Just, again, disastrous across the board for the Chargers for the most part.
Yeah, disappointing. I mean, actually there were some throws down the field on Sunday, which led me to make smile a little bit because I think that's what they need to do. But when you don't have your top 2 receivers, it's always tough to adjust. And now you saw Everett go down. That's even a bigger adjustment. So it puts more pressure on Herbert. And some of the throws he made, man, my gosh, he can make those throws down the field. It's just a matter of having the weapons outside and getting the calls. They didn't call a lot of them for much of this season. They seem to call more against the 49ers, which is a step in the right direction for this offense.
My Herbert feeling's kind of like my Broncos feelings. Like I thought, you know what, maybe we should just not play him anymore until Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are back, and then you look and he has the Chiefs. And basically everybody's scoring 20 to 23 fantasy points against the Chiefs besides Malik Willis. We saw Jimmy Garoppolo score 23. Trevor Lawrence just had 23. So he'll be a borderline starter next week for me just because it's against the Chiefs.
I was so concerned about him going into the game because he couldn't do it against Atlanta.
Right.
And then you see it against San Francisco, and it's okay, that's San Francisco. But it feels like we're back to Atlanta again. This is now 4 of his last 5 games, 16 points or less for Herbert. Just very frustrating right now. So hopefully Keenan Allen gets healthy. Hopefully Mike Williams gets healthy. And as Pete has said for months now, hopefully Brandon Staley and the offense get a little bit healthy and they start to challenge down the field. Some running back news. So Leonard Fournette left the game in Munich, where the Bucs were running the ball well, but it wasn't because of him. It was because of Rachaad White. So they go into their bye week, Pete. White coming off the first 100-yard game for a Bucs player this season. When we get off the bye, assuming Fournette is healthy, who's the best running back in Tampa Bay?
Rachaad White's the best running back in Tampa Bay. I mean, he runs to daylight. The other guy runs to contact. It's as simple as that. It's the most basic explanation for any running back argument there ever has been. You can go back to when you were playing pee-wee football, and somebody said, "Oh, he runs to the hole. He runs into somebody's back." That's what they do. That's what Fournette does. Rachaad White's a much better runner in terms of getting out in space and creating the ability to make people miss. So I think it's White. You've seen, and Tom Spencer told you that a couple weeks ago. They've been leaning in that direction. I think now it has to be in that direction.
Yeah, I think it's White because of what he did after Fournette left the game. I mean, that long run really kind of saved it. When Fournette left the game, he had 14 carries for 57 yards and a touchdown. White had 11 carries for 33 yards. Like, White got the start. Fournette was actually performing better. Fournette got hurt, and White really shined. And so they wanted him to be the better back in this game. He showed it late in the game. I think he'll be the lead back.
Yeah, I just wonder how much of the start was the passport situation that they had to prepare just in case Rachaad White was going to be the guy. But coming out of the game, you got to feel comfortable about it. And we just don't know if Fournette's going to be healthy following their bye week. Chicago, Khalil Herbert suffered the hip injury. We'll keep an eye on that situation heading into Week 11 against the Falcons. If he's out, obviously David Montgomery gets a boost from a workload perspective, has to get a boost from a production standpoint as well. And then for the Panthers, Pete, we got a quarterback change once again. P.J. Walker dealing with a high ankle sprain. Baker Mayfield steps in. How much of a step back is that potentially for this offense?
They're all the same guy. I mean, come on, they're all the same guy. None of them are very good. It's not a good offense. It's not a good passing offense. I just hope Baker didn't hurt his head when he was banging his head against guys' helmets in a cheerleader fashion coming off the field. By the way, he's never learned the real memo. If I'm not starting, I'm departing. I mean, I'm not cheering for my team if I'm not playing. That's the worst thing I've ever seen. I hate that stuff. Give me a break. But it doesn't matter who plays quarterback. The offense still stinks.